Hello, everybody. Welcome to Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota. I'm Katia, the president of Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota. CGS Minnesota is a nonprofit organization based in the state of Minnesota in the United States. Every month, we host one of our online projects. Tonight, it's time for our Human Rights Forum, and our guest speakers will discuss behind the numbers, understanding the impact of federal funding cuts. This event will be recorded and posted on our website and our YouTube channel. Questions from the audience will be accepted, and you can add your questions in the Q&A window. And if you need further information, please contact us after the event at the cgsmn.contact@gmail.com. So this event is free and open to anybody. If you want to learn more about CGS Minnesota, please visit our website, globalsolutionsmn.org, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to talk to you. So today we are hosting two wonderful human rights lawyers and advocates. Emily Hutchinson, Vice President of Global Programs from the Center for Victims of Torture, and Michele Garnett McKenzie, Interim Executive Director from the Advocates for Human Rights. So our first guest speaker, Emily Hutchinson, is an attorney with extensive experience in international human rights, transitional justice, and post-conflict governance. Her work has taken her across the US, Middle East, North Africa, and the Balkans, where she has advised governments, constitutional courts, and civil society organizations on issues ranging from constitution drafting to economic development and appellate advocacy. Prior to joining CVT, Emily served as a counsel at the Public International Law and Policy Group, advising clients the Middle East on international human rights law and justice sector reform. She also clerked for the Constitutional Court of the Republic of Kosovo, coordinated programs for the Middle East and North Africa Businesswomen's Network, and served in the U.S. Army Judge Advocate's Office. In Minnesota, she has managed statewide political campaigns and was the founding executive director of Mill Cities Commons. Emily, welcome to CGS Minnesota. The floor is all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Katya. And thank you to all of you who are here this evening for a conversation on this topic. It's certainly one that I think is of great importance, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to talk a little bit with you all about it, to hear from Michele, and of course to engage in some conversation. So the Center for Victims of Torture is a Minnesota-based nonprofit. Our mission is to heal the wounds of torture on individuals, their families, and their communities, and to end torture worldwide. We were founded in 1985, so we're celebrating our 40th year this year as an NGO after then Governor of Minnesota, Rudy Perpich, assembled a committee to recommend initiatives that would make a difference for human rights. The committee, in the end, proposed the creation in the United States of the first Center for Rehabilitative Care for survivors of torture. And as a result, CVT opened in St. Paul those 40 years ago with one mental health counselor. In the time that has elapsed since, we've grown geographically and programmatically. Today, we're really proud to offer culturally competent and interdisciplinary care to survivors of torture, along with initiatives to end torture, enhance the skills and resilience of human rights defenders and organizations, and facilitate justice for survivors. Prior to January 24th, 2025, we were 580 staff strong, and we're operating or supporting operations in over 15 countries and 3 US states. Unfortunately, on January 24th, 2025, we began receiving what are called stop work orders from the US State Department, including USAID, for our US government funded programs outside of the United States. We have a relatively large percentage of our funding that comes from US government grants and contracts. So this was a significant disruption to our operations, to our clients, and to our staff. Um, Unfortunately, we later received terminations, so just complete stoppage of four of our largest projects, two funded by USAID and two funded by another bureau within the State Department that supports refugees and people in migration. Those programs were global and then also focused geographically, several of them in Ethiopia and Jordan. So since that time, we've actually been forced to halt most of our operations in Jordan, Ethiopia, Iraq, and Uganda, including the provision of mental health and psychosocial services to victims of torture. For survivor, in terms of impact just on our beneficiaries, for survivors of torture, continuity of care is absolutely essential. We conducted a recent review of our programs and discovered that approximately one-fourth of incoming CBT clients have thoughts of suicide, and a quarter have attempted to end their lives before connecting with our organization. So we estimate that the sudden and frankly senseless disruption of this care that clients were receiving uh, has likely resulted in certainly widespread suffering, but also in several hundred deaths. I thought I'd share just an anecdote from a client from our CBT program in northern Ethiopia, a wonderful 14-year-old girl who had just been subjected to unimaginable abuse. She struggled with thoughts of ending her life and attempted suicide before coming to CBT. Through her therapy with CBT, she began to develop a fragile sense of safety and hope, right? Just beginning to sort of get back to where she was feeling a little bit of stability. When she learned that CBT services had been suspended indefinitely, she asked her counselor as tears were running down her face, "Are you leaving me alone like the others? Am I going to go back to how I was before I met you?" So it's just had this really personal impacts on our clients, on their families, and on their communities. That's just one example. We also were forced to terminate a technical assistance project that actually supports other torture treatment centers, 12 of them around the globe. And we had to immediately stop providing that technical support to those torture treatment centers as well. In terms of our own organization, we had to immediately furlough or terminate the employment of approximately 75% of our staff. Um, and for those of you in Minnesota, 25 of those staff are Minnesota-based, which is about 30% of our total Minnesota-based workforce. So a significant reduction in the incredible staff and colleagues who we've worked with over the years to provide hope and healing to survivors were very abruptly let go or furloughed. These furloughs and terminations included both programmatic staff, but also staff in all of our in our administrative departments, human resources, technology, communications, finance, risk management. Um, and so the loss of these staff has not just negatively impacted CBT's operations in the places where we received this federal funding, it has impacted our entire organization. We have been devastated by what has transpired. And we are continuing to think through how we can best move through this really chaotic, uncertain, and unprecedented time to emerge as a stronger organization, moving ahead, continuing to be able to do our work. Um, I think one final thing that I'll just note for people in case it's of interest is that CBT actually is part of a lawsuit against the State Department that is challenging the termination of these four projects. It's called the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition versus U.S. Department of State. We joined that lawsuit about a month to 6 weeks ago after really exploring all avenues that we could to think through, how can we work to check all the boxes, to tick all the questionnaires that we're being asked to do, and even after doing all of that, experiencing these terminations. So we have joined litigation that is ongoing in Washington, D.C. to challenge those terminations. Of course, we don't know if or when that will be successful and what the outcome might be, but feel that for us and for our clients, it's important for us to be part of that litigation and really articulating how just unacceptable and devastating and senseless what has happened in the foreign aid space is. So I will conclude there. And I know I'm eager to hear Michele's perspective as well. I know Advocates has also been through a lot.
Oops. Thank you so very much, Emily. Well, our next guest speaker, Michele McKenzie, is an attorney and human rights advocate who helps lead the advocates for human rights in advancing civil society and the rule of law. As an interim co-executive director, she oversees organizational operations, financial management, and strategic direction. Michele also leads the organization's immigration legal services, policy advocacy, and pro bono programs. Since joining the Advocates in 1999, Michele has represented asylum seekers, managed legal services for detained immigrants, and led impactful advocacy initiatives, mostly recently coordinating the organization's domestic advocacy and communications strategy to effect meaningful policy change. She has authored publications on human rights, human trafficking, and immigrant rights, and has documented human rights issues both nationally and internationally. Michele, welcome to CGS Minnesota, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Emily, for sharing all of that. It is a journey we're all on, and we're really glad to have a chance to just reflect on this with you at Citizens for Global Solutions. Thanks for this invitation. I think the chaos, the litigation, the box checking, the form filling out, the questionnaires is all part of the disruption and the intent here. And so as we go through this, I want to talk a little bit about who we are and also how we can see some of this in a bigger context to repress human rights in our own country and to undermine human rights protection and security and stability globally. The Advocates for Human Rights has been around just a touch longer than Center for Victims of Torture. We were actually the founding committee that convened and brought that idea to Governor Perpich to launch the Torture Treatment Center, and ran it until we got hired your first executive director. So congratulations on the anniversary. It's always fun to turn 40. We're solidly middle-aged human rights organizations here in Minnesota. We were founded in 1983 with that mission that you talked about, Katya, to implement international human rights standards to promote civil society and reinforce the rule of law. And we went through some strategic planning in the last year. And one of the questions we kept getting pushed on is, why do you have this mission? The facilitator, the planner, is this a good mission? This doesn't, I don't know what these words mean. And we said, really protecting civil society, the space that is not government or business, and reinforcing the rule of law, the idea that everyone is subject to the law and no one is above the law, really is very important. And I as we entered into 2025, I think I'm really happy that we stood firm in not tinkering with that mission. We are also a volunteer-driven organization. Our whole reason for being is to engage people in doing human rights work and really becoming advocates for human rights. Last year, we had more than 1,800 individuals who provided legal representation on immigration cases, monitored court hearings. We have a really large immigration court and criminal court monitoring project. We had volunteers advocating at the UN, doing research, greeting clients, and doing so much more to really be, strengthening and embedding human rights work in our community. And that resilience is really important to us right now as well. We know we have small staff. We are much smaller than CBT. We have a staff of about 35 paid staff, and would be really alone without our volunteers and our community alongside us in that work. And it also provided about $20 million in pro bono work last year. So that's a lot of work. Our budget is not all cash, and that gives us some resilience, for which we are deeply grateful in these moments of insecurity. Our core work at the Advocates includes immigration legal services, which has been, clearly in the target of the administration. We provide free immigration legal help to people seeking asylum, victims of trafficking, and unaccompanied children, and also to people in and out of immigration detention here in the upper Midwest. But we also work locally and nationally and internationally with human rights defender partners to abolish the death penalty, protect women and LGBTIQ plus people from violence, and build strong legal systems to protect them, and to ensure that people in migration can live with dignity. So our partnerships really are with human rights defenders in other parts of the world. And while we have always received some federal funding, or we have often received some federal funding, as an advocacy organization, we have had to do that with our eyes open. Don't have a blanket prohibition on receipt of federal funding, or government funding at all, but we know it can really put you in conflict with the ability to advocate. So that's something that has always been on our mind. But now we're really seeing the power of the weaponization or the ability to weaponize that power to try to get us to change our work, to try to get us to abandon our work, or to just make us abandon our work when whole swaths of programming are cut off. And I mentioned our international partners. They have really helped us put this in context, because this isn't just about the money. It really is about a desire to intimidate, to chill speech, to chill activity, to chill advocacy. And the scale for us here in the US is unprecedented. And the dollars, the sheer dollar value that the federal government has put into things like international aid and USAID programming that Emily, you were describing, and that has global impact on real human lives at a scale unlike other countries' investments. The tactics that we're seeing aren't exactly new, and I think the playbook that this administration is using comes out of those, its colleagues in other parts of the world. We reported in 2021 on sort of this attack against the Istanbul Convention, which is the Council of Europe's treaty on preventing and combating violence against women. It had entered into force about a decade ago, and really is an important international law treaty instrument addressing numerous comprehensive measures to prevent violence against women. And we worked with many partners in Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, and the former Soviet Union, who were expressing growing concern and alarming reports of attacks on their ability to do their job by their governments and by sort of a growing anti-gender movement. By 2021, those reported threats to us were, including harassment and intimidation and threats and funding cuts that were targeting their work, supporting women's human rights, gender equality, gender safety, and support for the Istanbul Convention. And some of the things that we documented and that are, just really were leaping to our minds as this year has been unfolding was reports of limiting the ability of human rights NGOs to receive international funding. It is, if we take funding from a foreign government, in the United States, we have to register as a foreign agent potentially. And so, that was a big power that was being exercised against our colleagues. Enacting burdensome registration or reporting requirements on federal on dollars received. Emily was describing questionnaires and ticking boxes. And, this was not just cutting off the money, but sucking up tons of organizational time and diverting it away from the mission into filling out boxes and evaluating whether you should respond and all of this. Actual intimidation and violent attacks against human rights defenders, invasion of spaces that normally were held for human rights NGOs by private interest groups or government NGOs, full-scale defunding of women's NGOs, and civil society reporting that they were self-censoring due to fear of persecution and lawsuits and loss of funding. This was all what our partners were saying they were experiencing. So one of our first staff meetings after federal funding cuts and after sort of the initial shock and awe of the executive orders came in to being was to have one of our partners from overseas join our staff meeting to talk to us about how they've navigated advocating in that space, because it is really it is our job, right? That is our job even in these times. But it has helped us to understand that the federal funding cuts are really part of a larger tactic to undermine human rights, to intimidate human rights defenders, to take out the good work that's being done, to waste our time, all of that. That this is not just about the money. It's about who we are. We did have a couple of important projects. One that was just launching, thankfully. So people had not made our partners had not made a lot of investment, but was a project to work with partners in Morocco on women's and LGBTIQ plus gender-based violence. And we were just launching that in the last quarter of 2024, when we got the first stop work order, and then the first termination notice, and then the second termination notice, maybe a third. They kept sending termination notices that were slightly different. We didn't really know what they were doing. One of them included a bizarre questionnaire about all sorts of things that really tracked the executive orders at the time. So they wanted all sorts of information about, and we're assigning points on things like, do we have an anti-trafficking policy? Do we demonstrate cost effectiveness and try to mitigate waste, fraud, and abuse? It was just this lengthy sort of probing that was sent to us, and then later made clear, oh, this is entirely optional. So a little game being played. That funding. We had zero hope of holding on to. It's a small program. It was just getting off the ground, and it was specifically around gender and gender-based violence in Morocco. We did not really think that we would be able to keep that going, and so that is gone. We did not answer the questionnaire because it was voluntary, but ironically, we're going to be paid a lot of money to settle out that contract. So they're paying us for our time, right? For doing no actual human rights work. So it just undercuts the idea that this was about making sure we were being efficient or any of this. It really is getting us to stop the work. So it's just incredibly stupid and frustrating, but also frightening. The impact on us for staff was, in terms of carrying staff costs, was minimal. We were glad to have funding for some of the work we do. We didn't need that. But for our partner, it was devastating. They were really counting on that money to do critical on-the-ground advocacy work. They had sub-partners who were going to be engaged in work that would have been, like very meaningful. Those dollars go so far in direct when you're doing that direct service work. So, it just, you think about each one of those projects worldwide that got halted. That what Emily, you described with, those individuals who are hurt is happening just all around. Right? The other project, our work that we have, I don't know quite where we are with it, but had federal funding for, was to represent children who are facing deportation from the United States on their own. So we're part of a network called the Acacia Center for Justice. Acacia won a contract. It was not a grant. It is a competitive private contract through the Department of Health and Human Services to help the United States make good on its obligation to protect children from human trafficking. And it was to provide legal representation to children who are in or have been released from the custody of the United States Office of Refugee Resettlement, which houses unaccompanied children who are found in the U.S. Without a parent or enter the U.S. without a parent or guardian. This is really the only funding for immigration legal services. Immigration legal services is not federally funded at all. So this was a really important step forward to establishing access to counsel that the government owes a duty to provide, but it has failed to provide systematically. So undermining a long-term advocacy effort there. But more importantly, it was representing 26,000 children at the time the program was cut. 26,000 children who were facing an immigration judge on their own. Many of those children still in custody. So, in detention centers in different parts of the United States. Our program has, we don't have a detention center here in Minnesota. So we have just a few lawyers dedicated to doing that representation. And we are able to, we weren't in a position where we had to let people go. But, some of the detention center staff was entirely funded by this grant or this contract. Those staff are in rural parts of the United States. When they were fired, they left. They can't just turn the tap on and rehire if the funding is restarted. Litigation in that case is also underway, and also contract negotiations. So this is a peculiar thing. It's not a grant. It is a contract. I think the original beneficiaries of the contract were intended to be private prison companies, and Acacia and others started trying to put in competitive contract bids to make sure that kids weren't represented by prison companies. So we have a whole different roll down of that contract through a settlement process and arbitration. So that's underway. After litigation, they did come back in and offer to restart some of the contract. So we're now currently funded again. And, the bookkeeping on this is just ridiculous. We have to put in a termination settlement proposal for a 40-day period where the contract was terminated and then it's restarted. Nobody has time to be doing all of this. So even where the money restarts, the weight of having to deal with all of this continues to be a drag on things. The human cost of watching children unrepresented in court is, incalculable. We are seeing our court observation project is there monitoring hearings, and every day that kids are on the docket, kids show up and they either have not been able to move their cases forward because they didn't know what forms to fill out or where to send them, or how to get things. They keep coming back to court saying, what am I supposed to do? And the judge says you're supposed to go and do things at other places, but doesn't explain what they are, and eventually gives up and orders them deported, or they just don't show up to court. Represented children appear at court in the high 90%. court appearance. Kids who aren't don't even know that they have a hearing. It's, I'm a parent of a now 20-year-old. As a 5-year-old, his paperwork management skills were horrible. He never went anywhere. He missed his hearings and deadline. It's ridiculous. This whole system is Kafkaesque and designed to fail. And without a grown-up by their side, let alone somebody who understands the system, they will be ordered deported and will be in this pile of people that we keep creating of de-documented or undocumented folks. So this is something that's impacting day-to-day representation, access to counsel, access to services, predictability of our own sustainability. But I think the NGO sector is not. We have to remember we're not the only ones affected by this. We have heard reports of police departments being threatened with having their funding cut off if they're not entering into voluntary agreements with ICE to do ICE's work. So, the leverage of federal funding is so powerful. It can really affect an NGO, but it can affect our government partners as well. And even while I'm sitting here, one popped up, just another settlement paperwork request just popped up into my screen on this. It is constant and devastating. We'll see where it goes. But I think the thing that keeps us all going is knowing that this is part of the struggle. This is what we are here to do, is to make sure that we can both fight for the work that we're to do and for the U.S. government to make good on its obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights obligations. It has that duty, and if funding is one way that policy is made real. So I'll stop there. If there are questions, we'll take those. Thanks.
It's so wonderful to hear both of you, and it's even harder to imagine where to start from. But thank you for your perspectives. I know more about the advocates on this question that I wanted to ask, and I don't know if CVT does. So I understand that the advocates usually does contributions in the Universal Periodical Review. And I understand that this year the United States is scheduled to submit in November. It's on review, and I'm wondering if the issue of federal funding cuts to NGOs, particularly those serving refugees, asylum seekers, survivors of torture, is expected to be included in any stakeholder submission. And is there still time for this issue to be formally raised and submit as part of the UPR process? I know that is usually 6 to 8 months, but I wanted to hear from you because I know, Michele, you guys do that. And I wanted to hear from CVT if they actually do that too.
Yeah, it is a moving target. The Universal Periodic Review looks at the UN Human Rights Council, looks at the human rights record comprehensively for each country that's a member state of the UN on a 4.5-ish year rotational cycle. The US is scheduled to be on cycle for review this fall. So initial civil society reports went in already, but that's not the end of the process. And we will see if the US asks for an extension, decides to tell the UN that it's not going to appear, makes clear it will appear, or just fails to appear. That has not ever happened for any member state, that there's just been a no-show. But we'll see what happens. One scenario is that they say, we're not going to show up at this session. And so things will be pushed back, which opens up a significantly bigger window for additional reporting and advocacy. But even if they did come in September, the information that we bring to the UN is always current. So we're always gathering things up to the minute. So the window's not closed there. But it is a moving target. In the first Trump administration, the US was also scheduled for its universal periodic review, and they were showing up, the State Department was showing up and providing, acting as it had under the previous administration. They came, they appeared, they took, notes back. So it is unclear what will happen. Emily, I don't know if you've heard differently, and I'm not in the UN gossip chain at our office and quite in there. So every day, like I could be out of date by a few days, but that's the last space that we're in. We'll see if we're going physically to Geneva. We're kind of keeping an eye on what the U.S. is going to do. But civil society is continuing to organize.
Yeah, we certainly have, excuse me, contributed to a number of different UN reports and publications. In particular, I think of the Special Rapporteur on Torture, and the agendas that get set by the Special Rapporteur each year, and thinking about those pieces, and also being present in Geneva when possible to help shape some of these conversations. But yeah, I also don't know I don't know enough about what the US is planning or not planning to do with respect to the current, the current EPR.
One other area with that, of course, the U.S. does pay into the United Nations, and that is going to have a huge ripple effect, in funding available through the UN Voluntary Fund, but also in its direct funding, its capacity. If as the U.S. is not making good on those obligations, that has, this is all in concert. So particularly devastating when it's hitting on all channels, including USAID funding and other federal funding.
Yeah, and I think just piggybacking off of that, the other thing we are also now seeing is that, other large donor countries are feeling permission to pull back, right? The levels of funding that they're willing to commit to, right? We've seen this in a number of different places across Europe. And so you have this like situation, I think, where they're gonna see significantly higher application numbers from organizations, particularly local organizations, who are desperate for a lifeline, and they're going to have fewer resources to think about using to support those folks. So it's kind of the worst case scenario of increasing demand and plummeting supply all at the same time. But yeah, we really have seen, many countries, I think, whether that's to satisfy their own domestic audience or not is, people have different perspectives on that, but certainly feeling now that the United States has so clearly stepped back from this role of funding foreign assistance, like feeling very empowered themselves to then not do it either, right? If the US isn't going to do it, why should we?
Right. And it is, we come at it from the lens of human rights and direct service, but you can look at those as clearly as from the lens of security. And when USAID was not founded to be really nice to people, it was founded as a part of our foreign policy and security policy, and is a big part of that. And so this has real consequences for deteriorating human rights conditions that will propel greater global migration, that will propel greater human rights violations in countries, and then have the lack of resources to deal with those, the lack of resources, both the helping side, but also the security side of the UN. All of this is just not good news at all, and really ties together.
True. Well, I wanted to ask another question, and I know that Emily, I already heard Emily responding to that one, and I'm going to make a little broader. So, how can the public or allied organizations best support your efforts to restore or protect funding in any way, both of your organizations?
Yeah, I think, one thing that we've observed being effective in certain contexts, right, are really are folks calling their elected officials and saying, this is what you're doing is wrong, and here's how it's impacting the people, your own constituents. I think, right, like figuring out what that hook is for elected officials is always, I think, mostly about figuring out how to make it local, and how to articulate why what is happening with foreign aid is so devastating to the United States itself, whether that be from an economic, security, or human rights perspective. And so I think I've observed that as being an effective tactic in certain circumstances. Now, I don't know that a lot has necessarily like changed because of it, but I think there have been some cases where there's some unexpected resistance in places like Georgia and places like Idaho, where you wouldn't necessarily think that people would be upset about cutting foreign funding, but in fact, we're quite upset because they actually do get a lot of money from USAID for agriculture programs. So I think that's, one like pathway, right, to for providing support. I think continuing to sort of share, right, provide opportunities like this and chances for people to really explain what this all means. I think sometimes it can feel when we read it in the newspaper, it feels quite remote. And it's sort of something that's happening mostly to people who aren't Americans and don't live here. And we might not really observe what that means, or really have a full understanding of what it means. So I do think continuing to talk to, friends, family, community members about why this is so devastating, and so important is also just an opportunity to help people understand why foreign aid is valuable, in the first place. So for me, I see those two pieces as important and I think quite actionable. Of course, we're pursuing additional tactics like litigation and, meeting with elected representatives. In fact, I was in a meeting yesterday, with the AG, with Attorney General Ellison, just talking about some of these impacts. And so I think those things are all ongoing as well. But in terms of what individuals might feel that they can do, I think those are some possibilities.
Yeah, I think not forgetting that our global community is part of our uh, part of this equation when there are so many things coming at us, is really important, and it is hard. It is really hard to keep track of everything that's happening. We all, to some extent, have to develop some like focus on our area because otherwise we couldn't do our work. But there is a lot of interconnectedness to this. And so if there's one thing that connects with you or that you can make that call to the legislator, that can open up, those other connections. I think that what you referenced about the farmers being the most impacted American citizens by the foreign aid cuts was maybe not something that the administration thought was going to happen, right? And we can make different policies around that. That could be a farm aid bill instead of a foreign aid bill, and have that same work. We don't have to call it the same thing to get the work done. We can be more creative around that and make those voices heard and get that get food to where people who are hungry need to eat it. That's something we should all be able to get behind. So I think opening up some different avenues and getting out of some of the boxes we might have could help. But just not forgetting that even if you care about international issues, that's okay. And you can raise that voice as long as all these other things are happening. Keep that all going too, because we need all those voices in there. It's tough.
It is. Well, and since you, Michele, mentioned, looking for different avenues, have you already found both of you? Have you already found other avenues or the alternative funding models to compensate for the losses?
I think we're on really different scales of the loss. So for us, we have a very diverse funding stream that we really strive to maintain, because the sort of trends of giving are very, they're trendy. And so sometimes one issue's hot and then everybody's forgotten about it. So for us, having like a variety of sources of support is really important, including what I mentioned, the pro bono participation in that. So it's been not easy, but it's been possible for us to maintain it. Like, we did not have to reduce our staffing or stop doing the work. And we were able to, we were able to look at things and say, well, we can keep representing kids even if we don't have this contract, because of the scale. I think when we're talking about replacing, tens of millions of dollars, it's a different scale. And then when we're talking about the government to government side, not flowing through USAID, but then we're really at something where the public itself can't, we can't directly impact that. We can't just chip in enough money. That is what taxes are for. That is what policy is for, is to make sure that we can make those collective decisions. So it's going to be on a different scale for us than I think for UCVT, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about replacing something along the order of $20 million annually. And at the end of the day, historically, since the end of World War II, the United States has been the most stable, significant source of funding for foreign aid. And so when that pillar is removed, it is really challenging, I think, to find, it's not impossible, and we're certainly exploring all sorts of opportunities and options, and I think we're incredibly grateful for the support, the individual level support that we have received since all of this happened, right? Just a really important reminder, I think, that people do feel the work is important. The work we're doing is important. The people who we're working with are important. Their health and safety and security matters just as much as anyone else's. And so we've been truly overwhelmed by that. And you cannot crowdsource $20 million. And so it is the challenge, I think, of not just us, but a lot of nonprofits in this humanitarian and human rights sector to determine how to pivot in a way that will sustain the work that we want to do, but recognizes that the funding revenue sources that support that are going to be completely different than they've been in the past. And how do we internally change our approach to revenue generation when, again, since the end of the Second World War, there's been really the Advocates is very, I think, quite unique in your diversity of funding. It's really impressive, right? That ability to maintain that sort of diversity of funding sources. And I think a lot of nonprofits don't have that level of diversity right now, and we'll have to determine how they can get it, if they can get it.
And it is sort of just a result of happenstance to have our issue diversity and
Totally.
But in national and local and international work. So we have help in creating that puzzle. But looking, when you mentioned $20 million annually, that's within an ecosystem of you do your work in Ethiopia not just by yourself. You have to have all the other international partners who make sure you can get to where you're going, and so it really is truly disruptive in that setting. If it was just you, but this is rethinking everything, which isn't, of course, necessarily a bad thing. We all have been in this luxury of having established spaces and organizations and ways of doing things that didn't exist 40 years ago or didn't exist 80 years ago. And is that we can do it, but it is going to be a big challenge and a big sector-wide challenge. And it is unclear in a vacuum of US funding in the international aid sector, who and how that vacuum will be filled. And I think it's safe to say that the first ones jumping into that vacuum and filling it will not be entities with human rights at the top of their agendas. So this could really set us back as a global community on a number of different levels in terms of the stability and safety of people and human rights respect that is precarious at the best of times.
That's very true. Well, as we come to a close, do you, Emily, and Michele have any final words of encouragement or call to action or any message for those listening today or to our recording?
Yeah, we are experiencing, I think, right now in the sector and in this country, something that unfortunately many of the people we work with, whether that be beneficiaries or human rights activists, or people in the justice system in other countries experience every day and have experienced for decades. And so I think where I really like draw inspiration and for, in this kind of time is like that, like we will be able to continue. The history of the human rights movement is a history of setbacks. We will be able to overcome and continue. That is, I am certain of that. And I think you need look no further than most of the places that, CVT or the advocates have worked outside the US and frankly inside the US too, to see that that resilience exists. It's possible. It is hard, really hard, and this feels devastating. And we have watched and walked alongside so many people who have I think been in very similar circumstances, right, in their own contexts, and they have overcome this, and we will be able to do that too. So that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, well said. I think this is what we were here to do. As a human rights organization, we weren't put here to like move forms around or conduct panels. Like this is the work we're called to do, and we haven't stepped up to the challenge over the years that our colleagues have had to. Right, we haven't been forced to do that, and so this is the time to do this work. But also we don't have to do it, like we can do it at the scale we can do it at, and any scale is better than nothing, right? Every step forward is a step forward. Every person that experiences justice does. And so, for us, like one case one is one case one. And that's really important. And if we were looking at this project in Morocco, ultimately, it's some money, but it's not beyond human scale to replace that. That is something that we can keep that work going with, because we have volunteers, because we have community who care, and we have the capacity of wealth in the United States to make those individual donations at any amount, big and small, all add up. We can continue doing good work and not let this go. And that's really inspiring as well. So, we just have to hang in there, everybody, and keep spirits up and not be intimidated.
Yeah. Well said, both of you. Well, on behalf of CGS Minnesota, I want to thank you all for attending this event. If you want to watch again, the recording of this discussion can be found on our website and on our YouTube channel. CGS Minnesota hosts events every month. Please check our website for updates so you know when it's coming up the next. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at cgsmn.contact@gmail.com. On behalf of CGS Minnesota, we extend our heartfelt thank you to Emily Hutchinson, the Center for Victims of Torture, Michele Garnett McKenzie, and the Advocates for Human Rights for this enlightening and deeply impactful presentation on federal funding cuts. The insights you shared are invaluable, especially as our country navigates pivotal changes that will shape our collective future. We are truly grateful for your time, expertise, and commitment to human rights. Please stay in touch. We at CGS Minnesota look forward to continue the collaboration, and I know it will happen. Thank you everyone for coming. I hope to see you all again very soon. Thank you all.